I was standing on my porch at 6 in the morning, coffee in hand, when I saw the construction crew rolling onto what I knew was my land. The sun was just beginning to paint the Montana sky in shades of orange and pink, and there were 3 trucks kicking up dust on the eastern section of my ranch, right near the property line I shared with that new development that had sprung up like weeds over the past 2 years. My name is Oliver Thompson, and I had owned this 300-acre ranch outside of Billings for 15 years, inherited it from my grandfather who had worked this land since the 1960s. I set my coffee down and grabbed my truck keys, my gut telling me this was about to be a very long day. By the time I drove the 1.5 miles across my property to where the trucks were parked, they had already started unloading equipment. A man in a hard hat was directing workers, and I could see survey stakes with bright orange flags dotting a line that cut straight through land I had ridden horses across just yesterday. I parked my truck and walked up to the foreman, trying to keep my voice level. "Morning. I'm Oliver Thompson, and this is my property. What's going on here?" I asked. The foreman, a stocky guy with a thick mustache, looked at me with confusion. "We're with Morrison Construction. We're putting in a community park for the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Got the permits right here." He pulled out a folder from his truck and showed me official-looking documents with the county seal. I took the papers and scanned them quickly. My blood pressure started rising as I read the property description. This says Lot 47 through 62 of Meadowbrook Estates. This isn't Meadowbrook Estates. This is my ranch land. Has been for decades. The foreman scratched his head. "Look, buddy, I just go where they tell me. The HOA paid us to build here. You got a problem, you need to take it up with them. I got a job to do." "Not on my land, you don't," I said firmly. "I'm going to need you to stop work immediately until we get this sorted out." The foreman sighed and pulled out his phone. "Let me call the HOA president. She's the one who signed the contract." 20 minutes later, a white Mercedes SUV came bouncing down the dirt road that led to my property. Out stepped a woman in her late 40s with blonde hair styled in that particular way that screamed suburban management type. She was wearing white capris and a pink polo shirt, completely inappropriate for ranch land, and her face already looked pinched with irritation. She marched over to where I was standing with the foreman. "I'm Patricia Henderson, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association." "There seems to be some confusion here," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "No confusion on my end," I replied. "You're trying to build on my property without permission." Patricia pulled out her own folder, this one much thicker than the foreman's. "Actually, according to county records filed 6 months ago, this land was legally annexed into the Meadowbrook Estates development boundaries. It's part of our community now, which means it falls under HOA jurisdiction. We voted to turn it into a park." I stared at her like she had grown a second head. "That's impossible. Nobody contacted me about any annexation. This land has been in my family for 60 years. The county sent notices to the property owner of record," Patricia said, examining her manicured nails. "If you didn't receive them, that's not our problem. The annexation went through proper legal channels. We followed procedure." "Like hell you did," I shot back. "I check my mail every day. I never got any notice about annexation proceedings." Patricia gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, the county has certified mail receipts that say otherwise. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a construction schedule to keep. The community voted on this park, and we've already allocated $50,000 from our reserve fund." I pulled out my phone. "Don't move a single piece of equipment. I'm calling my lawyer right now." Patricia rolled her eyes. "Do what you need to do, but I'm telling these men to continue working. You're welcome to try to stop us, but I should warn you that interfering with legally permitted construction is a crime." My hands were shaking as I dialed Robert Martinez, my attorney who had handled my grandfather's estate and various ranch business over the years. I explained the situation while Patricia stood there with her arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. Robert told me to take photos of everything, get copies of whatever documents they had, and to come to his office immediately. He said he would file for an emergency restraining order to stop construction. "The lawyer says you need to halt work until we can get before a judge," I told Patricia and the foreman. Patricia laughed, actually laughed. "Your lawyer can file whatever he wants. We have permits, we have documentation, we have legal annexation papers. You're just a man who ignored his mail and now wants to throw a tantrum. Come on, gentlemen, let's get started. We're losing daylight." I stood there and watched, absolutely helpless, as the construction crew began marking out the boundaries for what was apparently going to be a playground and picnic area. On my land. On Thompson family land. I took dozens of photos and a video, then drove straight to Robert's office in Billings, breaking every speed limit on the way. Robert Martinez had been practicing law for 30 years, and I had never seen him look as concerned as he did when I showed him the documents Patricia had given me copies of. He spread them across his conference table and spent 2 hours going through every page with a fine-tooth comb, while I drank terrible office coffee and tried not to punch a hole in his wall. "This is sophisticated," Robert finally said, leaning back in his chair. "Whoever put this together knew what they were doing. They filed the annexation petition with the County Planning Commission, and it looks like they claimed there was no opposition from affected property owners." "Because I never knew about it," I said. "How is that legal?" "It's not, if we can prove you never received proper notice," Robert said. "But look at this. They have an affidavit from a process server claiming he personally delivered annexation notice to your address on 3 separate occasions over a 4-month period. Each one is signed and dated." I leaned over to look at the documents. "That's a lie. I'm at my ranch every single day. Nobody came to my door about this." "Do you have any security cameras?" Robert asked. I shook my head. "It's a ranch, not Fort Knox. My nearest neighbor is 2 miles away." Robert sighed. "Here's what we're dealing with. The HOA filed a petition to expand their boundaries under Montana Code, annotated section 76-3207, which allows for annexation of unincorporated adjacent properties under certain circumstances. They claimed the annexation would provide essential services and infrastructure improvements to undeveloped land. They submitted surveys, environmental impact assessments, and a development plan. The Planning Commission approved it after what appears to be proper public notice procedures. "But I'm not in their HOA," I protested. "I never signed anything. I never agreed to be part of their community." "That's the problem," Robert said. "If the annexation is valid, you don't have to agree. The county has the authority to redraw property boundaries for planning purposes. Your land would still technically be yours, but it would be subject to HOA covenants and restrictions." I felt my stomach drop. "Are you telling me I'm screwed?" "I'm telling you we have a fight on our hands," Robert corrected. "The good news is that there are strict requirements for property owner notification in these cases. If we can prove you never received proper notice, we can challenge the annexation as invalid. I'm going to file an emergency motion today to stop all construction and to set aside the annexation order. But Oliver, I need you to understand something. This could take months, maybe even years to resolve, and it's going to be expensive." I thought about my grandfather, about the sweat and blood that had gone into this ranch. I don't care how long it takes or what it costs. This is my land, and I'm not letting some suburban HOA dictate what happens on it." Robert nodded. "Okay, let me get started on the paperwork. In the meantime, do not confront them physically. Do not damage any of their property and document everything they do. Everything." I spent the next 3 days watching construction crews tear up my grazing land. Robert got us before a judge, but the judge refused to issue an immediate restraining order, saying that on its face, the HOA's paperwork appeared to be in order, and that this needed to be handled through a full hearing. That hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. 6 weeks of watching them pour concrete and erect playground equipment on land where my grandfather had raised cattle. The HOA moved fast. I had to give them that. Within 2 weeks, they had a complete playground installed, complete with swings, slides, and one of those elaborate wooden castle structures. They put in picnic tables, barbecue grills, and a parking area. They even planted trees and laid down sod for a grassy picnic area. Every day I drove out there and took pictures, documenting the transformation of my property into their community amenity. But here's the thing about that particular section of my ranch. It was on the eastern edge, right up against where the development started, but it was also the high ground. And sitting right in the middle of what they were now calling Meadowbrook Community Park was something they had apparently overlooked in their surveys and planning. There was an old well house there, a stone structure my grandfather had built in 1967. Inside that well house was the primary access point to the underground aquifer that fed the entire region's water supply. Now, my ranch had water rights dating back to 1952, some of the oldest and most senior water rights in the county. My grandfather had secured them when he first bought the property, and they had been meticulously maintained and renewed every year since. What made this particular situation interesting was that the new Meadowbrook Estates development, when they had done their planning 5 years ago, had drilled their community wells in their own section, about a 1/4 mile west of my property line. But here's what I discovered when I started really digging into the property records and geological surveys. The aquifer in this area flowed from east to west, and the primary recharge zone, the place where surface water percolated down to refill the aquifer, was right there on the high ground where they had just built their park. My well house sat directly over the main water-bearing formation, and according to the geological surveys, the development's wells were drawing from the same aquifer downstream. Montana water law is complex, but it follows the prior appropriation doctrine, which basically means first in time, first in right. My grandfather's 1952 water rights were senior to everyone else's in the area. If there was ever a shortage or conflict over water usage, my rights took priority. And I owned the access point to the source. I spent a week consulting with hydrologists and water rights attorneys, spending money I really didn't have but considering it an investment. What I learned was fascinating. The aquifer flow rate in this area was substantial but not unlimited. The development had 400 homes, all drawing water from wells that tapped into this aquifer. During normal conditions, there was plenty of water for everyone. But if someone with senior water rights decided to maximize their usage, or if someone decided to restrict access to the recharge zone, things could get very tight very quickly. I started formulating a plan. If the HOA wanted to play games with property rights and annexation, I could play games with water rights. The law was crystal clear on that front, and my rights predated their entire development by decades. The preliminary hearing finally arrived, and I sat in the Yellowstone County Courthouse with Robert, while Patricia Henderson and her attorney, a slick-looking guy named Douglas Pierce, presented their case to Judge Margaret Yamamoto. They brought maps, surveys, affidavits from the process server, and certified mail receipts showing that proper notice had been given. When it was our turn, Robert systematically dismantled their case. He presented my testimony that I had never received notice. He brought in my mail carrier, who testified that while she had delivered certified mail to my address before, she had no record or memory of delivering anything related to annexation proceedings. Robert also presented evidence that the address listed on some of the certified mail receipts was slightly wrong, showing my address as 4758 Ranch Road instead of 4578 Ranch Road. Your Honor, Robert argued, this is a case of a homeowners association trying to expand its territory and tax base by annexing property without properly notifying the owner. My client has owned this ranch for 15 years, and his family has owned it for 60 years. He has never been part of this development, never agreed to any HOA covenants, and never received proper legal notice of these proceedings. The entire annexation should be set aside as invalid. Douglas Pierce stood up, adjusting his expensive suit. Your Honor, the HOA followed every required procedure. If there was an error in one address digit on some correspondence, that's a clerical issue, not grounds to invalidate a properly executed annexation. The County Planning Commission approved this after due consideration. Construction has been completed, and the community has already invested significant resources in good faith reliance on valid permits. Setting aside the annexation now would cause substantial hardship. Judge Yamamoto looked over her glasses at both attorneys. I'm going to need time to review all of this evidence and the relevant statutes. This is not a simple case. However, I am troubled by the notice issues raised by Mr. Martinez. I'm issuing a temporary order prohibiting any further changes to the property in question until I can issue a full ruling. That means no additional construction, but it also means Mr. Thompson cannot interfere with the structures already in place. I'll issue my decision within 30 days. I left the courthouse feeling like I had at least been heard, but knowing that 30 days was a long time to wait. That evening, I sat on my porch and thought about water rights and property rights, and what my grandfather would have done in this situation. He had been a tough man, fair but not someone you wanted to cross. He had taught me that sometimes you had to fight fire with fire. The next morning, I called a well drilling company out of Billings. I need to expand my water withdrawal capacity, I told them. I'm thinking about starting an irrigation operation, maybe getting into more intensive agriculture. What would it take to drill 2 more wells and set up a significant pumping system? The drilling company sent out a surveyor, and within a week, I had a proposal for 3 new wells positioned strategically on my property, all tapping into the same aquifer that fed the development. The cost was steep, nearly $80,000, but I had been saving money for years and had good credit. I took out a loan using the ranch as collateral. While the well drilling company was doing their preliminary work, I also contacted a water rights attorney named Sarah Chen, who specialized in Montana water law. I showed her all of my grandfather's original water rights documentation and explained the situation. You're in an incredibly strong position, Sarah told me. Your water rights are among the most senior in the county. You can withdraw up to the amount specified in your rights, which according to these documents is substantial. Your grandfather secured rights for up to 500 gallons per minute for agricultural and livestock purposes. What if I wanted to actually use all of that? I asked. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Currently, you're probably using a fraction of that. Most ranches don't need their full allocation. But if you decided to exercise your full rights, you absolutely could. You'd need to demonstrate beneficial use, but irrigation, livestock watering, even commercial operations would all qualify. And if my increased usage affected the water availability for other users downstream, I asked. Then those other users would be out of luck, Sarah said bluntly. That's how prior appropriation works. First in time, first in right. As long as you're not wasting water, you can use your full allocation. If that means junior water rights holders experience shortages, that's their problem. They should have secured better rights or drilled in a better location. I hired Sarah on the spot and authorized the well drilling company to proceed. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 new wells going into the ground at strategic points on my property, all positioned to maximize draw from the aquifer. The drilling rigs were loud and obvious, and I noticed cars from the development slowing down on the nearby road to watch the work. Patricia Henderson showed up at my ranch about 3 days into the drilling operation. I was expecting her. I watched from my porch as her white Mercedes navigated the dirt road to my house, looking completely out of place. She got out of her car, and I could see her face was red even from a distance. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded as she marched up to my porch. "Morning, Patricia," I said calmly, sipping my coffee. "I'm drilling wells on my property, perfectly legal." "You're doing this to retaliate against the HOA," she accused. "This is harassment." "This is ranching," I corrected. "I'm expanding my agricultural operations. Going to put in some irrigation systems, maybe start raising more cattle. I have water rights that allow for significant usage, and I intend to exercise them." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "You're trying to drain the aquifer." "I'm using water I have a legal right to use," I said. "Unlike some people, I actually own my property and have documentation proving my rights to the resources on it." "The HOA will sue you," Patricia threatened. "Get in line," I replied. "In case you forgot, we already have a court case pending about you illegally annexing my land and building on it without permission. How'd you think that's going to go, by the way?" Patricia took a deep breath, clearly trying to control her temper. "Look, Mr. Thompson, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Perhaps we can come to some kind of arrangement. The park is already built. The community loves it. What would it take for you to drop your legal challenge?" "You could start by tearing down everything you built on my land and staying on your own property," I suggested. "Be realistic," Patricia said. "The HOA has already spent $50,000. We can't just abandon the park. What if we offered you compensation? We could pay you for the land use." "I don't want your money," I said. "I want my property back." Patricia's fake friendly demeanor dropped. "You're being unreasonable. The annexation was legal. Judge Yamamoto is going to rule in our favor, and then you're going to be stuck as part of our community anyway. You'll have to follow all HOA rules and pay assessments just like everyone else." "We'll see about that," I said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have wells to drill. Feel free to see yourself out." Patricia left in a cloud of dust and fury, and I went back to watching the drilling operation. The crews were making good progress, and within another week, all 3 wells were completed and tested. The water flow was excellent, even better than the initial surveys had suggested. I then hired an irrigation company to install a massive sprinkler system across 80 acres of my property, right in the section that had previously been used for grazing. The sprinkler system was industrial grade, the kind used for large-scale farming operations. It could pump and distribute thousands of gallons per hour. I also had several large stock tanks installed and began filling them continuously, establishing what's called beneficial use in water rights law. I wasn't wasting water. I was storing it for livestock use, which was completely legal and protected under my water rights. About 2 weeks after I started running my new water system at full capacity, I got a call from a man named David Rossiter, who introduced himself as a member of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board. He asked if he could come talk to me about a community matter. I agreed, curious about what angle they would try next. David showed up that afternoon in a Subaru Outback, wearing khakis and a button-up shirt. He seemed less aggressive than Patricia, more diplomatic. I invited him to sit on my porch, and we talked while I worked on repairing some tack. "Mr. Thompson, I want to apologize for how Patricia handled things initially," David started. "She can be a bit intense. The board has been discussing the situation, and we realize there may have been some miscommunication about the annexation process." "Miscommunication is a polite way of putting it," I said. David nodded. "Fair enough. The thing is, we're now dealing with a new issue. Several residents have reported drops in their water pressure over the past week. The development's well system is showing reduced flow rates. Our engineers think it might be related to your new wells." "Might be," I agreed, not looking up from my work. "It's causing problems," David continued. "People can't water their lawns properly. Some are having issues with their irrigation systems. If this continues into summer, it could get serious." "I'm just using water I have a right to use," I said. "Senior water rights dating back to 1952. Your development's wells are junior to mine. If there's a conflict in water availability, my rights take priority. That's Montana law." David shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, our attorney explained that to us, but surely we can work something out. This seems like a situation where everyone loses. Your legal fees must be piling up. Our community is dealing with water issues. Can't we find a compromise?" I finally looked up at him. "Here's my compromise, David. The HOA acknowledges that the annexation was invalid, tears down the structures built on my land, pays for restoration of the property to its original condition, and agrees to never attempt to include my ranch in your HOA boundaries again. In writing. Filed with the county. Do that, and I'll reduce my water usage back to what it was before." David sighed. "Patricia will never agree to that. She's convinced Judge Yamamoto is going to rule in our favor." "Then I guess we're at an impasse," I said. "I'll keep using my water, you'll keep fighting your court case, and we'll see how it plays out." David left looking worried, and I felt a small sense of satisfaction. I wasn't being vindictive, I was protecting what was mine. If the HOA had simply respected my property rights from the beginning, none of this would have been necessary. Judge Yamamoto's ruling came down 6 weeks after the hearing. Robert called me immediately, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Oliver, we won. The judge set aside the annexation." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. What was her reasoning? She found that the notice procedures were inadequate and that the HOA failed to prove you received proper notification, Robert explained. She also found that the process server's affidavits were questionable given the address errors and lack of corroborating evidence. The judge ruled that annexing occupied ranch land without clear and convincing proof of property owner notification violated due process. She's ordered the annexation reversed and given the HOA 90 days to remove all structures from your property and restore it to its original condition. "What about their argument that they relied on valid permits?" I asked. "Judge Yamamoto said that was their risk to take," Robert said. She noted that they proceeded with expensive construction while the property owner was actively disputing the annexation. She called it imprudent and said they couldn't now claim hardship from their own aggressive actions. I thanked Robert and sat down on my porch, feeling lighter than I had in months. But I knew this wasn't over. HOAs don't give up easily, and Patricia Henderson didn't strike me as someone who accepted defeat gracefully. Sure enough, 2 days later, I received notice that the HOA was appealing Judge Yamamoto's decision to the Montana District Court. Robert said this was expected, and that the appeal process could take 6 months to a year. In the meantime, Judge Yamamoto's order was stayed, meaning the HOA didn't have to remove the park structures yet. "They're hoping you'll run out of money or patience," Robert told me. "Appeals are expensive and they're betting you'll settle." "How much is this going to cost?" I asked. "Could be another $20,000 to $30,000 for the appeal, maybe more if it goes to oral arguments," Robert said. I did the math in my head. Between the well drilling, the irrigation system, and the legal fees, I was already in for over $150,000. The ranch was profitable but not hugely so. I was eating into savings and equity, but I thought about my grandfather again and knew what he would say. "Some things are worth fighting for." "Do whatever we need to do," I told Robert. "I'm not settling." The appeal process dragged on through the summer and into fall. During this time, I kept my water usage high, exercising my full rights. The effect on the development was noticeable. Lawns turned brown. The HOA had to implement watering restrictions. Some residents complained about low water pressure. The HOA tried to drill additional wells, but they ran into problems because all the new locations they proposed were also drawing from the same aquifer, and my senior rights still took priority. In August, I got a visit from a county water commissioner named Frank Delgado. He was investigating complaints from Meadowbrook Estates residents about water availability. I showed him all my documentation, including my grandfather's original water rights and my beneficial use records. "You're not doing anything wrong legally," Frank told me. "Your rights are solid and you're putting the water to beneficial use, but I have to tell you, there are a lot of unhappy people in that development. They should talk to their HOA board about why they built a park on someone else's land without proper authorization," I said. Frank nodded. "I heard about that situation. Whole thing is a mess. But just so you know, the HOA is lobbying the county to restrict senior water rights during drought conditions. They're trying to change the law." "Good luck to them," I said. "Prior appropriation has been Montana law for over a century. They're not going to overturn it because some HOA wants to ignore property rights." By October, the water situation in Meadowbrook Estates had gotten bad enough that it made the local news. A reporter from the Billings Gazette came out to interview me. I explained the whole situation, showing her Judge Yamamoto's ruling and my water rights documentation. The article that ran was surprisingly balanced, though the HOA refused to comment beyond a statement from Patricia Henderson saying they were confident the appeal would be successful. The article brought me some unexpected support. Several other rural landowners in the county reached out to me, sharing their own stories of conflicts with expanding developments and HOAs. I learned I wasn't alone in fighting against suburban sprawl that ignored existing property rights. A few of them even contributed to a legal defense fund that someone set up online, which helped offset some of my attorney costs. In November, something interesting happened. I got a call from a woman named Felicity Lawrence who identified herself as a resident of Meadowbrook Estates. She asked if she could come talk to me, saying she wasn't there on behalf of the HOA but as a concerned homeowner. I was skeptical, but agreed to meet her. Felicity was in her early 30s, a teacher at one of the local elementary schools. She drove up in a Honda Civic and seemed genuinely nervous about meeting me. We sat in my kitchen, and she explained her situation. "Mr. Thompson, I bought my house 3 years ago. It's my first home. I had no idea about any of this conflict when I moved in. Now my water pressure is terrible, my lawn is dying, and I'm getting hit with special HOA assessments to pay for legal fees. It's costing me an extra $200 a month. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, I said sincerely, but I'm not the one who created this situation. Your HOA tried to steal my land. I know, Felicity said. I've been reading the court documents. I think what Patricia and the board did was wrong. A lot of residents do, actually, but we're the ones suffering for it. We're not all like Patricia. Most of us just want to live in our homes peacefully. What do you want from me? I asked. I was hoping to understand what it would take to resolve this, Felicity said. The board isn't telling us residents anything useful. They just keep saying they're going to win the appeal and everything will be fine. But the legal fees keep going up, and the water situation keeps getting worse. Some people are talking about a class action lawsuit against the HOA for mismanagement. I thought about this. Here's the thing, Felicity. I've been clear from the beginning about what I want. The HOA needs to admit the annexation was wrong, remove everything from my land, and leave me alone. That's it. I'm not trying to hurt individual homeowners. I'm protecting my property. What about the water issue? Felicity asked. Is there any way you could reduce your usage while the legal case is ongoing? It would help a lot of families. I considered this carefully. I'll make you a deal. If the HOA drops their appeal and complies with Judge Yamamoto's order, I'll immediately reduce my water usage back to normal levels. But I'm not doing anything while they're still fighting to take my land. Felicity nodded. That's fair. Can I share that with other residents? Maybe if enough of us pressure the board, they'll listen. You can share whatever you want, I said. But be prepared for Patricia to make your life difficult. She doesn't strike me as someone who tolerates dissent. Felicity left, and I didn't think much more about it until a few weeks later, when I saw another article in the Gazette about a petition being circulated by Meadowbrook Estates residents calling for the HOA board to settle the dispute with me and remove the park. According to the article, over 200 of the development's 400 homeowners had signed it. This seemed to light a fire under Patricia Henderson. She launched a campaign to discredit me and the petition, sending letters to all residents claiming I was an unreasonable bully trying to deprive families of water. She organized a community meeting where she showed photos of the completed park and talked about how much the children loved playing there. She brought in an attorney to explain how the appeal was going great and they expected to win, but the cracks were showing. At that same community meeting, according to residents who contacted me afterward, several homeowners challenged Patricia about the costs and the water situation. There was a motion to recall the HOA board and hold new elections. Patricia managed to defeat it, but only barely. The vote was close enough that it clearly shook her confidence. December brought the oral arguments for the appeal. Robert and I drove to the district courthouse in Billings, where a 3-judge panel would hear both sides. Douglas Pierce argued for the HOA that Judge Yamamoto had applied too strict a standard for notice requirements, and that the county's approval of the annexation should be given deference. Robert countered that property rights were fundamental, and that strict notice requirements existed precisely to prevent what happened here: a landowner being stripped of property rights without knowledge or consent. He argued that the HOA's aggressive construction, despite an ongoing dispute, showed bad faith, not good faith reliance. The judges asked tough questions of both sides, and it was impossible to read how they were leaning. At the end, they said they would issue a written decision within 60 days. Christmas came and went. I spent it alone on the ranch, as I usually did, though several of my neighbors stopped by with food and well wishes. They had all followed the case and were firmly in my corner. January brought bitter cold and snow, which meant less worry about water usage since nobody was irrigating anyway. But I kept my systems running, filling stock tanks and maintaining beneficial use. The appellate decision came down on a freezing morning in late January. Robert called me at 5 in the morning, waking me from a sound sleep. "Oliver, the appeals court affirmed Judge Yamamoto's ruling," he said. "We won. The annexation is invalid. They have to remove the park." This time the relief was even stronger because I knew this was likely the end. The HOA could try to appeal to the Montana Supreme Court, but Robert said that was unlikely to be accepted given that 2 different courts had now ruled against them. "There's more," Robert said. "The appeals court also ordered the HOA to pay your attorney fees. They found that the HOA's actions were objectively unreasonable and that they proceeded with construction in bad faith. The court basically said they ignored clear warning signs that the annexation was problematic." "How much are we talking?" I asked. "I'll need to tally everything up, but probably close to $40,000, Robert said. "It won't cover all your costs, but it's something." Over the next few weeks, reality set in for the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. They had lost their appeal. They were on the hook for my legal fees plus their own legal costs. They had to remove an expensive park, and they were still dealing with water problems caused by my senior water rights. The financial situation was apparently dire enough that they had to levy a special assessment of $1,000 per household to cover the costs. This was the final straw for many residents. A new petition circulated, this one successfully recalling the entire HOA board. Patricia Henderson and her allies were voted out, replaced by a new board that included Felicity Lawrence and several other residents who had pushed for settling with me all along. The new HOA president, a man named Marcus Webb, called me in early February. "Mr. Thompson, I want to start fresh. The previous board made some terrible decisions, and the whole community is paying for it. We'd like to comply with the court order and make this right. Can we talk?" I invited Marcus to the ranch, and we had a long conversation about how to move forward. He was an engineer, practical and straightforward, and I appreciated his direct approach. We worked out a plan where the HOA would remove all park structures within 60 days, pay for restoration of the land including reseeding and soil remediation, and file formal documentation with the county acknowledging my property boundaries and agreeing never to attempt annexation again. In exchange, once the park was removed and restoration was underway, I agreed to reduce my water usage to pre-conflict levels. I also agreed not to seek additional damages beyond the attorney fees the court had already awarded. "I want you to understand something," I told Marcus. "I'm not against your development or your community. I'm against anyone trying to take what's mine without permission. If your board had approached me 2 years ago and asked to lease that land for a park, we could have worked something out. But they tried to just take it, and that's not acceptable." "I completely understand," Marcus said. "For what it's worth, a lot of residents had no idea what Patricia was doing until it was too late. We're trying to fix her mistakes." The park removal began in March. A demolition crew carefully dismantled the playground equipment, removed the picnic tables and grills, and dug up the concrete pads. It took 3 weeks to clear everything. Then, a landscaping company came in to restore the land. They removed the sod, tilled the soil, and reseeded it with native grasses. They even brought in a bulldozer to recontour some areas where grading for the parking lot had changed the drainage. I supervised the restoration work, making sure it was done properly. Marcus was true to his word, and the HOA paid for everything without complaint. By the end of April, you could barely tell there had ever been a park there. In another year, once the native grasses grew in, it would look like nothing had ever happened. True to my agreement, I dialed back my water usage significantly. I kept the wells operational but reduced pumping to minimal levels. Within a week, residents of Meadowbrook Estates reported that water pressure had returned to normal. The crisis was over. In May, I received a check from the HOA for my attorney fees, $42,000, covering most of what I had spent on legal costs. Combined with the loan payoff timeline for the wells and irrigation system, I figured I would break even within 5 years. The property was improved with better water infrastructure, which increased its value. And most importantly, my land was secure, clearly established as separate from the development. I had one final interaction with Patricia Henderson. I ran into her at the feed store in Billings in early June. She was with a woman I didn't recognize, and when she saw me, her face went through several emotions, finally settling on resigned bitterness. "I hope you're happy," she said. "You destroyed that park and cost everyone thousands of dollars." "I protected my property," I corrected. "You're the one who made this expensive by ignoring the law and other people's rights." "We were trying to improve the community," Patricia insisted. "That land wasn't even being used for anything. It was being used as a ranch, which is what it's zoned for and what it's been for 60 years, I said. "And even if it was sitting vacant, it's still mine. You don't get to just take things because you think you have a better use for them." Patricia opened her mouth to argue more, then seemed to deflate. "The new board banned me from holding any HOA position for 5 years. They blame me for everything." "You were the HOA president," I said. "You made the decisions. So yes, you're responsible. Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to annex someone's property without proper notice." I left her standing there and went about my business. I felt a little bit of sympathy for her, but not much. She had been so convinced of her own righteousness, so sure that she knew better than everyone else, that she had led her entire community into an expensive disaster. That was a lesson she needed to learn. Life returned to normal on the ranch. Summer came, and I spent my days doing what I had always done: maintaining fences, caring for my cattle, and watching the Montana sky. The land that had briefly been Meadowbrook Community Park returned to open range, exactly as it should be. I would occasionally see cars from the development drive slowly past, residents looking at the empty space where playground equipment had once stood, a reminder of what happens when HOAs overreach. I also heard through the grapevine that several residents of Meadowbrook Estates had filed a class action lawsuit against Patricia Henderson, personally, and against the previous HOA board members, seeking to recover their special assessment costs. That case was still ongoing as far as I knew, and I had no part in it, but I wasn't surprised. When you cost 400 families $1,000 each through your own stubbornness and poor decisions, people tend to get upset. Felicity Lawrence came by the ranch one afternoon in July, bringing me a homemade pie as a thank you gift. "A lot of us really appreciate how you handled this," she said. "You could have made things a lot worse, but you were willing to compromise once we got reasonable leadership." "I never wanted to hurt regular folks," I told her. "I just wanted to keep my land." "Well, you've become a bit of a folk hero among some of the rural property owners around here," Felicity said with a smile. "I've heard at least 3 other landowners have successfully fought off HOA annexation attempts by citing your case. That made me feel good. If my fight had helped other people protect their property, then all the stress and expense had been worth it. Property rights matter." They're not just abstract legal concepts. They're about people's homes, their livelihoods, their family heritage. My grandfather had built this ranch from nothing, and I had a duty to protect it, not just for myself, but for whatever came next, whether that was kids of my own someday or some other future I couldn't yet predict. As autumn arrived again, bringing another cycle of seasons to the ranch, I found myself reflecting on the whole experience. I had learned a lot about HOA law, water rights, and the court system. I had learned that standing up for yourself is expensive and exhausting but necessary. I had learned that most people are reasonable when given the chance, but that there are always some who let a little bit of power go to their heads. Most importantly, I had learned that my grandfather had been right about the importance of maintaining clear property boundaries and senior water rights. Those old documents he had carefully filed and renewed year after year had been the key to protecting the ranch. Without those 1952 water rights, I would have had no leverage against the HOA. Without clear property records, it would have been much harder to prove the annexation was improper. I made a point to ride out to the eastern section of the ranch regularly, the area that had been briefly designated as Meadowbrook Community Park. The native grasses had come back thick and healthy. My cattle grazed there peacefully. The old well house still stood, a stone monument to my grandfather's foresight. Everything was as it should be. On a crisp October morning, almost exactly 2 years after that first construction crew had rolled onto my land, I sat on my porch with my coffee and watched the sun rise over the eastern range. The development was visible in the distance, rows of houses with their manicured lawns and tidy streets. I bore them no ill will. People needed places to live, and there was nothing wrong with suburban communities, as long as they respected the property rights of those around them. My phone rang. It was Marcus Webb from the HOA. We had stayed in cordial contact, mostly handling final details of the settlement and restoration work. "Oliver, I wanted to give you a heads up," Marcus said. "The HOA is planning to build a new community park, but this time it's going to be on property we actually own, in the center of the development. We're having a groundbreaking ceremony next month, and I wanted to invite you. I think it would be a good gesture toward putting all this behind us." I thought about it. "You know what, Marcus? I appreciate the invitation, but I think I'll pass. That's your community's project, not mine, but I wish you well with it." "That's fair," Marcus said, "but the invitation stands if you change your mind. And Oliver, thank you for being reasonable once we got our act together. A lot of guys in your position would have dragged things out just for spite." "Not my style," I said. "I got what I wanted, my property back and recognition of my rights. No reason to make it worse than it had to be." We said our goodbyes, and I went back to my coffee. The ranch stretched out before me, 300 acres of Montana grassland that had been in my family for 3 generations. It would hopefully be here for 3 more, or 30 more, long after the current disputes and personalities were forgotten. The legal documents were all filed with the county now, clearly establishing the boundaries between my ranch and the Meadowbrook Estates development. The court decisions were on record, creating precedent for other property owners facing similar situations. My water rights were reaffirmed and documented. Everything was locked down tight, legally bulletproof. I thought about Patricia Henderson sometimes, wondering if she had learned anything from the experience or if she just felt persecuted and misunderstood. I hoped she had learned something, but I suspected people like her rarely did. They were so convinced of their own righteousness that they interpreted any opposition as personal attack rather than legitimate disagreement. But that wasn't my problem anymore. My problem had been solved. The annexation was reversed, my land was restored, and my rights were protected. Everything else was just aftermath. As winter approached again, I focused on preparing the ranch for the cold months ahead. I made sure my cattle had adequate shelter and feed. I checked all the fences and made repairs where needed. I serviced my equipment and stocked up on supplies. Life on a ranch followed natural rhythms that had nothing to do with HOAs or legal disputes. The wells I had drilled during the conflict remained as permanent improvements to the property. I had learned a lot about water management and aquifer dynamics. The ranch's water security was now better than it had ever been, which would serve me well in the years ahead as climate patterns shifted and water became an increasingly precious resource. I received the final payment from the HOA in November, the last installment for restoration costs and a check for additional legal fees that had been tallied up. With that money, I was able to pay off the loan for the wells ahead of schedule. The ranch was now debt-free again, improved and secure. One of my neighboring ranchers, a man named Bill Peterson who owned the spread to the north of my property, stopped by in December to talk about organizing a group of rural landowners to monitor County Planning Commission meetings and make sure no more surprise annexation attempts happen to anyone. "Your fight woke a lot of us up," Bill said. "We need to be more active in county politics, make sure our interests are represented. These developments keep expanding, and if we're not careful, they'll swallow us all up." I agreed to join the group, which we informally called the Yellowstone County Rural Landowners Association. We started attending Planning Commission meetings and county commissioner sessions, making our voices heard on zoning issues and development proposals. It was boring work most of the time, but it was important. Democracy requires participation, and we had all learned that lesson the hard way. By the time Christmas rolled around again, the whole saga of the HOA annexation and the water rights dispute felt like it belonged to another era, though it had only been 2 years. I had moved on, the community had moved on, and life continued. I spent Christmas Day with some neighbors, a tradition that had developed over the years among those of us who ranched in this area. We shared a meal and stories, and inevitably someone asked me to tell the story of how I had fought off the HOA. I obliged, though I tried to keep it factual and not too self-aggrandizing. It was just something that had happened, something I had to deal with. "The key thing," I told them, "is to know your rights and document everything." My grandfather's old water rights and clear property records were what saved me. If you don't have that stuff organized, you're vulnerable. Everyone nodded seriously, and I knew several of them went home that night to dig through their own property records and make sure everything was in order. That was probably the most valuable outcome of my whole experience, making other people aware of the importance of protecting their property rights before a crisis hit. As the new year began, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction with how everything had turned out. I hadn't set out to be a crusader or to make a point. I had just wanted to protect what was mine. But in doing so, I had ended up standing up for something bigger. The principle that property rights matter, that HOAs don't have unlimited power, and that prior appropriation water rights serve an important purpose in the West. The ranch continued to thrive. I made some improvements, using money I had set aside now that the legal bills were behind me. I upgraded some equipment, fixed up the barn, and even built a new equipment shed. These were the kinds of investments that made sense, improving my operation and my quality of life. I never did hear whether Patricia Henderson's former board members ended up paying damages in the class action lawsuit. I didn't follow it closely since I wasn't involved. But I heard rumors that they had settled for a significant amount, which was distributed to the homeowners who had paid those special assessments. Justice, in whatever form it takes. The land where the park had briefly stood was now indistinguishable from the rest of the ranch. The native grasses had completely grown back, and wildlife had returned to the area. I saw deer grazing there regularly, and once I spotted a small herd of pronghorn antelope moving through. This was how it was supposed to be, open range supporting the ecosystem and agricultural use, not paved over for suburban amenities. I kept the well house maintained as a tribute to my grandfather. I would go there sometimes and think about the chain of events that old man had set in motion back in 1952, when he first filed for water rights. He couldn't have known that those rights would be crucial to protecting the ranch 65 years later, but that was the thing about planning ahead and doing things properly. You created options for the future. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that the conflict had actually strengthened my connection to the ranch. Having to fight for it made me appreciate it more. I understood now in a visceral way what property rights meant and why they mattered. This wasn't abstract political philosophy. This was about real land, real water, real livelihood. The appeals court decision had set precedent that was already being cited in other cases around Montana. Robert Martinez told me that he had gotten calls from attorneys in other parts of the state dealing with similar HOA overreach situations, all wanting copies of our case files. Our fight had become part of the legal landscape, a warning to HOAs that they couldn't just steamroll property owners and expect courts to back them up. As spring returned once more, bringing green grass and warmer weather, I found myself at peace with how everything had resolved. I had my land back. My rights were secure. The HOA had been held accountable for their actions. The legal system, slow and expensive as it was, had ultimately worked correctly. I thought sometimes about what would have happened if I had just accepted the annexation, maybe negotiated some kind of token payment and let them keep their park. I would have saved myself a lot of money and stress. But I also would have lost something fundamental: my independence, my property rights, and my self-respect. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight is hard. The ranch would be here long after I was gone, just as it had been here before I arrived. My job was to be a good steward of it during my time, to protect it and improve it and pass it on in better condition than I received it. By standing up to the HOA and asserting my rights, I had done that. The property was now legally secure in ways it hadn't been before, with clear boundaries and established precedent protecting it from future encroachment. And so life went on, following the rhythms of the seasons and the demands of ranching. I woke each morning to the Montana sunrise, drank my coffee on the porch, and went about the work that needed doing. The HOA dispute was behind me, just another challenge faced and overcome, another story to tell around the fire on cold winter nights. The land remained, solid and real beneath my feet, 300 acres of grass and sky and possibility. My grandfather's legacy, preserved for another generation. That was what mattered in the end, not the legal arguments or the courtroom battles or the money spent and recovered. Just the land itself, still here, still free, still ours. That was victory enough.